Yep, let's get started.
But that was entertaining.
Always is.
So there's a few people trickling in now.
Good afternoon, everybody. We're just going to give everybody a few moments to get into the room and settled in before we begin.
It's 3:45, Teen. I think I'm going to get started, okay?
Okay, let's do it.
All right. So welcome, everyone, to intermediate session with planning in the new math curriculum. This is part one, and we'll talk a little bit later on about part two and what that might look like. We'd like to just start out by acknowledging that the land on which we are gathered is part of the traditional territory of the Chippewa, Odawa, Potawatomi, and Delaware nations. And by personally making a land acknowledgement, you are taking part in an act of reconciliation, honoring the land and Indigenous heritage, which dates back over 10,000 years. We have another full panel with us today. We have some guest teachers joining us. We have Kristen Heaton and Nastasha Lovell, who are rocking the intermediate world with their virtual at the VLES. We also have Brandon Owen, who is also doing some fabulous work from East Lambton. Welcome. My name is Denise Ladd, and I am with the school board as an instructional coach, and I am joined by my colleague team to go. And we also have back by special request, Heather Wark joining us all the way from Thunder Bay. Welcome, everyone. Looks like we're going to have a fantastic show for everyone here today. Go ahead.
Yeah, just I want to take a moment just to thank everybody. I know that it is an extremely busy time of the year for everybody. A lot has been asked of everybody here this year, and your commitment to joining us today just really demonstrates your care for your students and trying to help provide the best for them. So thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to come and learn with us.
For sure. One of the things we're going to start with today is a Jamboard. And basically, here's a link to it, and I will put that in the chat. We want everybody just to know what are some of your thoughts on the new math curriculum, ways that you've used it, questions you still have. And we're going to leave this open for the next little while, actually, so that if you can jot down some ideas right now or today or later on next week. And you will even use some of those when we're planning for our second session coming in January.
So give everyone a few moments just to kind of put your thoughts together.
We all seem to be muted.
So are we just putting our questions into the Jamboard? Is that what we're doing, Denise, right now?
Yeah, sorry, my microphone was muted there.
Okay.
Yeah, we are. We're just putting our thoughts into the Jamboard. And like
Okay.
we said, we'll keep that open. And after that, we'll take a look at it for January's planning session.
So we'll leave that deck open. As questions, if thoughts arise, definitely leave it there, because there are some things that we might touch on today that might kind of pique your interest and you'd like to know more about, and we can investigate those in session too.
Perfect. All right, so in today's session, we're going to touch base in the math curriculum. We're going to look at some of the key changes between the 2005 curriculum and the 2021. We're going to look at this, how it could affect your considerations for planning and programming. We're going to look at some of the changes with the curriculum expectations and what stayed the same. We're going to look at some helpful tools for teacher supports. And the last thing we're going to touch base on is assessment and evaluation in our growing success document. Teen has a handy dandy little pointer, I guess you call it, that you've downloaded. And he's going to be manning going on the website, the live website, excuse me. And the little pink cursor really helps accentuate the areas that we're going to be talking about. Maybe Teen could talk briefly about where he got that little download from.
Yeah, it's a little utility called PX Keystrokes UI, and it was a free open source utility. So if you're presenting, one of the things that we were trying to kind of make easier was keeping track of the cursor and kind of where we're going through the screen. So you can see as I scroll, what's going on there. If I make a click, you can see that on the screen as well. So I know that for many of us, the math curriculum, with the previous 2005 curriculum, you like to work in paper. You kind of had it dog-eared, and there was sticky notes kind of all through it. And we've kind of moved in a different direction. The ministry has moved to a digital curriculum. So one of the things that you're probably going to want to do right away is just find that curriculum. If you Google Ontario Math Curriculum 2020, that's going to take you to the site. And then you want to make sure that you have that bookmark just for frequent reference. So the first thing that we're going to take a look at today is just kind of this is where you're going to land when you get to the 2020 digital mathematics curriculum. This is kind of where the headings: home, grades, curriculum contents, resources, and downloads. We're going to start in the curriculum context. So this is kind of the front matter of the new curriculum. It's where you learn a little bit more about the thinking that went into it, the research that informed some of the changes. Something that we wanted to kind of start. We're not going to touch on all of it, but we thought it would be important to begin by looking at the strands in the mathematics curriculum in 2020. So I click. So now that we're in here, throughout the pages, you're going to see these headings on the side. They're kind of quick links to access different parts of the web page. So strand A is one of the new strands: social emotional learning and the mathematical processes. B is number, which previously was number sense enumeration. C is now algebra, data. E is now spatial sense. We're going to talk a little bit more about that momentarily. And strand F is now financial literacy. So something that we wanted to touch on was that's new is strand A. It's the first of the new strands. And the intent here is that so much of students' identity in mathematics relates to these learning skills. So ensuring, like, helping students to learn and manage their emotions while using these processes. So helping them to manage emotions, for example, while problem solving, while proving and reasoning.
Right. It's important to note the mathematical processes were in the previous curriculum, and now they're just showing how the social emotional learning, and they can kind of be embedded together.
So there's some good highlighting of kind of the key components of the social emotional strand, as well as strategies that teachers can use to integrate into their planning when you're planning your mathematics lessons, to ensure that like that social emotional strand is being addressed. So if we look in on this side of the chart, we see things like applying strategies such as using a feelings chart to learn words to express feelings, or using a feelings thermometer. So I think that like often we teachers do that kind of instinctually in the classroom. We do things like asking students to kind of give us a thumbs up, or one to decide to express kind of understanding. Lots of different ways that we often do that, but kind of like codifying it into like it's part of the mathematics that we're doing.
Mhm.
If I can just say something there, if that's okay, Teen,
Yeah.
that is interesting and certainly has been written about. I know John Vanderwall has it in most of his resources, the idea that it's important for us to take a bit of a diagnostic how our students feel about mathematics, because one of our goals, I hope, throughout the year is that by the end of the year, they feel better about mathematics than maybe they did at the beginning, unless they already felt really good about it.
Mhm.
Because we know culturally that can be a bit tricky, but that we do want our students to enjoy math and that it's fun for them.
Great points. Yeah.
So what I thought was helpful here was that there were specific examples of strategies. So you can go to this chart and look at, okay, these are some strategies that I can kind of take and implement right into my mathematics program, a little bit more tangible and easily implementable. The next thing we wanted to take a look at were the new strands. So we're going to jump down here to strand E, which is the spatial sense strand. Can you share a little bit about this, Denise?
Sure. So this is one of the key changes that Tina and I were talking about. Really makes sense to us, because before we could never understand why measurement and geometry were considered separate strands. Quite often we would end up teaching them at the same time, because they have quite a few concepts in relationship to one another. So one of the things we talked about is we like the fact that these are now combined together in the same strand. And we hope that teachers really help this and notice this is helpful in how they teach the strand.
Is Heather, are you aware of does this come from research, or like are you do you have a little bit more insight into how this decision was made?
I don't. We weren't. I don't think Alex was a part of this particular
Okay.
strand of the curriculum this round, but I know that definitely the ministry's been looking into spatial sense for a while, and it does make intuitive sense for us,
Mm-hmm.
for sure, that these pieces would go together.
And the final one there is strand F, the financial literacy. It's a new strand, but a lot of the skills and concepts and expectations that are covered in there were in the previous number sense and number sense strand from before.
Yeah,
and, go ahead.
I took a look at some of the previous resources that the ministry put out from before, where the number sense was, or the financial literacy was kind of just embedded in number sense previously. They've kind of detangled it and made it kind of its own separate strand here.
Yeah.
So we thought that would be important to highlight these new strands, because these are specifically new things that you're going to kind of have to plan for and think about as you plan out your year.
Right.
Also on this page, under the heading of some considerations for program planning, and particularly under instructional approaches to mathematics. Although there's kind of been a lot of talk about kind of going back to the basics and focusing on fundamentals, it's spelled out very clearly here that Our instructional approaches to math should support the development of conceptual understanding and procedural fluency, is that we're not trading one for the other, and that conceptual understanding comes first, as well as skill development, communication, and all the other things that we're doing, as well as the importance of like the climate in which that learning takes place, making sure that that's a safe, positive, inclusive learning space where students are going to feel valued and empowered. And we thought it would be important to share some research on high impact practices.
Right, there's a whole PDF on this section, which I find quite beneficial. There are several instructional approaches that are included in this PDF. We're just going to highlight a few of them, and we're hoping Heather Wark could talk to us about the problem-solving tasks and experiences.
Right now? Is that my cue? On the beep. No problem. Sorry, is that now that you want me to say that?
Sure, go ahead, Heather.
Oh, okay. Well, just, for me in mathematics, the problem solving tasks and experiences are probably the most important one on this list, because this is how we learn about the mathematical situations and right from the ground up, so that we understand where the mathematical relationships are and what they are and what they mean in the real world. We always hear about students saying, yeah, but how is this going to help me, in real life? And if they come to learn and understand the mathematics from real life first, then those questions don't come up. And they really do understand where this applies for them right from the beginning. And these tasks and experiences, I think for me, are one of the biggest pieces of my mathematics program when I'm planning. So each week I'll for sure have a day that's dedicated to some kind of bigger task. And then on other days, smaller experiences like your number talks and things like that.
Can I ask a question about that, Heather?
Yeah.
Quick. I wonder that myself, because I am teaching 7-8 and I'm finding that I am getting that a lot with my kids. Well, it's pointless, right? How am I going to use this? But for me, I guess planning and being new to math, I'm finding it challenging to find those everyday life examples to fit in with what the curriculum's saying, and seeing, okay, where exactly will they use this in real life? So sometimes it's easy to find depending on the expectation, but sometimes it's challenging to kind of find that real world connection of everyday life stuff, so.
It's very true, Natasha, and I appreciate that you said that it sounded like you were either newer to teaching or newer to teaching mathematics.
Yeah.
It takes years for teachers to develop a program that they're happy with, that gets to real life tasks across all areas of the curriculum, really engaging work. So I think just be generous with yourself as you're learning, that you're not going to hit a home run on every single one, and they're not all going to be as maybe real life examples that the kids connect to every time. But as you're developing your practice over years, you'll pick and choose the ones that really work, and you'll find more examples like that as they fit in the curriculum as you move forward.
We had an interesting discussion about the idea of one of the practices highlighted here was direct instruction, and kind of like making sure that we had a clear understanding of what that meant, and when it might be appropriate. So, there might be kind of a misconception or an idea that direct instruction is like, I just show the kids how to do it. And is that kind of what is intended there when we're thinking about direct instruction, or are we thinking about that maybe a little bit differently?
Are you asking me, Teen?
I'm asking anyone who
Yeah.
I'm genuinely interested in kind of thoughts on this.
Well, I know for me, I know from the research that certain areas of direct instruction just do not work. So directly instructing a procedure where a student doesn't already understand the mathematics and already maybe doing the same mathematics mentally, doesn't actually help them or work. They tend to confuse things because they don't actually understand the mathematics and they don't remember the order, and it's very, very hard going. And you feel like every year you have to reteach the same thing. It's because they didn't actually understand it. And we tried to it's like trying to open up someone's head and pour something inside. It just doesn't work that way. And so direct instruction doesn't work in sort of those places where we probably experienced it a lot ourselves. And what we gave up as students when we were kids coming through is sense making. So we had to give up our own sense making in order to just follow steps that we didn't really understand, many of us. The majority of us probably, which is probably why lots of people didn't like mathematics coming through. It wasn't very fun. But there are places where direct instruction is required, and that's where we're working with not a concept, but we're working with a social construction. Like, for example, that you put a decimal. It's called a decimal, and it separates whole units from partial units. That's not something kids are going to construct. That's a social convention, and that's something that we can tell through direct instruction.
Brandon, would you be okay with, we had a great conversation about kind of sense making last week as I was working with you. Would you be okay with sharing a little bit of that story?
You might have to refresh my memory.
You were helping a young child with some division.
Yeah. So we're doing arrays in division and looking at the quotive. We're looking at the quotive, right? And I was helping my girlfriend's son with long division, and he had like 16 questions going on. And it had the little boxes underneath where all the numbers were supposed to go, and the boxes up the top. And I said, do you understand what you're doing here? And he goes, well, kinda. And each question that he went to, he kept looking back at the other questions to try to remember the steps. And he was confusing himself each time that it went. And so I didn't want to get into the sort of debate of, okay, well, I'm going to show you how to do an array so that you can understand it, because this isn't the greatest task for you. So since you're not understanding it, Tian suggested, talk to him later about it and show some examples after with that. So, and it was an epiphany for me to see that, he was struggling a lot. And we all grew up on that sort of, okay, here's your 20 million questions of long division. And like, we can ride that bike over and over again, but we can't explain what it is. And I can see him struggling with it now. And as Tian and I showed my class, I saw how easy, the array model was and the ratio table for figuring out long division, or not long division, division.
Awesome.
Well, yeah, it's when it makes sense for kids, it's so powerful. And
I was going to use that word too, Teen, and it's one of the things that maybe is daunting. And I was just thinking about it as Brandon was talking. I hadn't really thought about it this way before, but as teachers, we're thinking about planning, and we think about these problem-solving tasks and experiences, and maybe we're thinking about those sheets of 20 or 40 questions that we used to have to do. If they are, really solid and good problem-solving tasks and experiences, it doesn't take that many for them to actually really understand. And then once they understand, then we can work towards an algorithm if we want to, and then they can do multiple questions without as much pain or tears or struggle as Brandon was saying with his girlfriend's son.
Thank you. Something that we thought we wanted to touch on were a couple of other high impact strategies that we thought, we want to make sure that we are giving somewhere in our planning and designing of the learning is that we're integrating these ideas. So one of the things we thought was really critical was tools and representations. The particular expectation that we're going to look at today is patterning, and particularly there, the importance of tools and representations.
And I think intermediate classes it's been typical or prototypical, I guess, that they think that manipulatives aren't used in intermediate classrooms. And we're here to say that, hopefully that's not true. They're a great resource for the kids. The visual representation is really phenomenal and helps them get those concepts that they can grasp.
And even beyond manipulatives, Denise, like Brandon was saying with the array, like that visual
Yes.
model for multiplication and division is very, very powerful for their understanding. And so sometimes I think that those pieces are forgotten. They maybe do them in grade 4 or 5. And we, as intermediate teachers, that's what I taught too. We just didn't realize how important and valuable they could be for our students who are older.
Right. And that often, like the concept, or the idea that a manipulative is only a way of showing understanding versus that we can actually think on that model.
And create understanding.
Right.
And develop understanding through that model.
Right.
First, we develop our understanding with the model. It's a model of our thinking, and then it becomes a model for thinking afterwards. So, yeah.
And also just kind of finally, one of the things that our board as a strategic priority is focusing on is number talks. And we want to be clear about when we're talking about number talks, we're not specifically only talking about the Sherry Parish kind of prescriptive number talk. We're talking about numbers. So examples might include things like which one doesn't belong, or we're talking about estimistries or splats, and all those things that get kids thinking about numbers and relationships and reasoning and proving. Those are kind of skills that we're really trying to help students build. And just kind of like in language, we know that like understanding or learning kind of like happens on a sea of talk. The same thing is happening in mathematics, and we're really trying to advance that idea in our board, and it will be something that you're going to see an increased focus on across the district.
Teen, there's a good resource too from Joe Bowler out about data talks.
Yes.
Too, that
Right.
explain well and have a lot of excellent examples.
Yeah.
For sure, Brandon. Get kids thinking math, right? They think math, they talk math. Absolutely. Okay, Dean, I think where we're going to next is to that the actual key changes document.
Okay, so I'm going to go back home. The key changes document is located under resources. And in here are here's a separate document for those high impact instructional practices that goes a little bit more in depth if you'd like to look more closely at those. This key changes document highlights the key changes between the 2005 and 2020 curriculum. And for those of you that are looking for exemplars for long-term plans, they're also located here. Okay, I'm going to go into the key changes.
Perfect. So this document is laid out in a chart form. It compares the 2005 curriculum to the 2020 curriculum. And it tells you how they have combined some expectations, what some things have changed, they've taken out, they've added some, they've moved some from other grades. And if we go specifically to the strand B1 there, when we get to the number sense team.
Yeah. So there's some interesting things that are happening here. So previously in the 2005 document, grade 3 students were responsible for multiplying up to 7 times 7, and then using those related division facts. And we see now that students are working on times 2, times 5, times 10, and then representing multiplication up to 10 times 10 using tools and drawings. We thought that Heather might be able to speak a little bit to the sequencing of what's happening now and kind of why that's why the change in the curriculum.
In terms of the sequencing of the multiplication facts?
Right, yeah, so how come, why were the sequence has changed?
Well, intermediate teachers are gonna love this because basically, instead of you know, starting at 0 times and moving its way up to 10 times, like the old curriculum maybe used to. What we're doing now is we're actually trying to support teachers to teach the multiplication facts as the connected facts that they are, so that students will have the opportunity to develop key mathematical properties, understanding of the key mathematical properties of distributive property and the associative property as they're working with real numbers, working with these multiplication facts, hopefully modeling them on the array, seeing how, for example, 5 times is half of 10 times and how that can support them, you know, to be able to do those multiplications, even beyond the ones that we would consider the facts, towards being able to find, say, 5 times 35 or something like that, based on their knowledge of 10 times a number like 35, that they'd be able to just understand that relationship and be able to figure that out, which is going to help us in the long run greatly as we head towards multiplication and division by much larger numbers, that they hopefully will have a greater understanding of how these facts are connected.
And that, you know, like just as our learning changes, our practices change. And, you know, so, and even that's even for sometimes with those conversations with parents, is that we now know so much more about how children really learn mathematics, and that knowledge is now being integrated into our curriculum.
Exactly, yeah.
So I'm gonna jump down here to what we're going to look at specifically today.
Perfect. We're going to look at the C, specifically C1.
Sorry, my mouse has gone a little crazy here. Okay, sorry.
Perfect, no problem. It's been one of those nights. I had a fire alarm going off here that I had to mute myself. Apparently they're working on the equipment, but it's over and done with now. All right, so we are going to look tonight at the C1, and which is about patterns. And if we look at the comparison chart the team has up for us here now, we'll notice that there is a lot of repeating patterns, growing patterns, repeating patterns, growing patterns. And we don't really get into shrinking patterns until grade 5, according to our new curriculum. And I know we were talking to Heather about that the other day, and she has some thoughts on that. And Tina and I, as intermediate teachers, totally agree with her. Heather, you want to just briefly share what you're saying about the shrinking patterns?
Well, I was just saying that, you know, again, the shrinking patterns require, without getting too technical, they
Yes.
are a much more difficult pattern when you actually look at the mathematics that are going on inside those shrinking patterns. It's complex mathematics. And so this new curriculum has shifted them somewhat. And, you know, as a researcher, I would hope that they might shift them even a little bit more. Certainly the recursive pattern, so like that they're subtracting the same amount each time, is simple enough. But when you actually look at the pattern rule, like what the actual function is, what the relationship is that's being demonstrated through the pattern, it is a multiplication by a negative integer. And so that's not something that grade 5s are really working at. And so it's very complex, the mathematics.
Right. So if we're thinking about applying pattern rules to shrinking patterns in grade 8, for example, we're going to want to lay down the foundation by making sure that we've done some work multiplying negative integers.
Yeah, before you can really expect them to recognize what that would mean, that shrinking pattern.
Right.
For sure. So I think from here, Teen, we're going to go and start looking specifically at the actual curriculum.
Oh, I've lost my slide deck.
The first chart that we're going to take a look at is the one that is going to show the comparisons We're on slide 11, Dean.
Thank
All right, so this is going to show patterns and relationships, and it shows our specific expectation that's broken down into this overall expectation. So Teen, if you could go to the actual curriculum. And we're going to go to grade 7. We're going to look specifically. And we're going to look at them by strand. And we're going to algebra. And there is our first overall expectation we're going to look at. So it talks about identify, describe, extend, create, make predictions about a variety of patterns, including those found in real life contexts. Now we're going to go to the specific expectations. And here they are again. I think we want to get to the other chart actually, Team, where we compare them all the way across.
All the way across.
Yeah, the overall ones there.
Okay. So in order to get a full view across sort of the entire curriculum, so I went over to downloads, and if we scroll down, we're going to get a view of a PDF that allows us to see the expectations from grade 1 to grade 8.
Right. And I really enjoy this view because it shows us that the same overall expectation is going across all grades. But then when you look down at the specific expectations, it talks about the specific skills that the students are going to need for those grades. And I can really see this being beneficial for when you're filling out IEPs. If you have some modified students in your class, they're not doing that much different work than everyone else. They're working on the same overall expectation. They're just working on a different skill that will help them reach that expectation. I'm just wondering if any of our teachers out there would be able to just pop on and touch base how they think this chart might be helpful for them to know where their children are coming from and where their students need to go.
I find it quite useful because I'm doing a 5-6 and a 6-7. So then I'm able to go, okay, what am I looking at? What have I decided on? Okay, I'm doing patterning or algebra, and I can just pull this out and go bang, bang, bang. Like it makes planning so much easier.
Right, and we were talking earlier too about the fact that last year when we were doing remote learning, there might be some concepts that students didn't quite get. So if you have to go back and refer to the year previous to where your students are, just to see maybe what is going on with their learning, what might they not have gotten. So you might have to go back a little bit further even, and this chart's perfect for that.
And I think that something that we don't necessarily also like need to look back, right, is that we can kind of keep our eyes on the mathematical horizon for students and start kind of like laying some groundwork down for those things that we know they're going to need to kind of tackle later. And I think that this view really helps us kind of see, oh, this is where they need to go at some point. I might do a little bit of groundwork to get them a little bit closer or ready for that thing next year.
Perfect.
I was just going to say as well, I actually just showed this to kids the other day because I'm in 7-8, and we just started our patterning, and they said, oh, this is what we did in grade 6. I'm like, and someone else said this is what we did in grade 7. I'm like, well, you've actually done it every year since kindergarten. So, and I actually showed them kind of this chart, and I said, this is what you did here, and it just builds every time, and even going into high school. And I know they said that in the LCCVI meet today, it's just building. It's just building on everything you've learned before. So I really kind of went through that with the kids today and just actually brought this chart up and showed them on the screen. Like this is, right. It's just builds on the year before.
That's like, perfect timing, Nastasha, because we actually have the jam board that you had. Tina, if we go back to the slide deck. Could you talk a little bit about that? We have the one up about your patterns. What was going on here?
So I specifically, we just started the unit, and I just wanted to know kind of what they remembered, what they recalled, what they associated with patterns. So I just said, I had algebra and I had patterns. So I just said, tell me everything that you know about patterns. And that was some of the responses that I got. A lot of them kept saying repeating. And I'm like, does a pattern do anything else? I kind of prompted them there. And I think a couple were really good. I was surprised at what they knew. And then some are just, and then a lot said too, like, oh, well, you know, it's hard. It was really hard. You know, it was easy in kindergarten or whatever. Some said that. And so it was just the variety of responses that I got was very formative for me to know where I need to start and where I need to go.
Yep, perfect.
And
That's
there's
why you do
hopeful-
a diagnostic. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
hopeful. It says they're not bad. They're okay.
Mhm.
They're
They
very
were
hard
fun. Yeah.
to do, so
Perfect. So then from here, we thought, well, then you could take and kind of explode that up a little bit, and we go to the grade comparison chart theme,
Okay, so I'm
where
gonna,
you look really at the what happens the grade before the one you're teaching and the one that happens the grade after you're teaching. The teens going back to our strands,
I'm gonna go back to algebra,
algebra.
and this compare grades. This is where we get that view where we see the grade below and the grade above.
And again, we're looking at the grade 7 one, which is why it's blue. And,
So
and if you
what-
look at it, there isn't that big of a difference. To go up to the grade 8, you add on the shrinking pattern with basing it on a constant rate and initial values.
I really like how it's the way that it's been laid out. This in the new curriculum is knowing kind of like the expectation that directly correlates from the grade before. You used to, in the old curriculum, you're kind of like jumping around and you're not sure if this was the expectation that led into this one. That it's a little bit more explicit now.
Sure. And from here then, Tina, I think we can also talk about the teacher supports tab that's added on to the specific expectations.
So when we go into this specific expectations, this is where we can open up our teacher supports. And inside here are really kind of like the big ideas for this expectation and help us as teachers to kind of understand, okay, what is it that we really want students to understand?
And I think with like Natasha's question earlier, if I was reading some of these, this is where I would be trying to find real life examples of how can we tap into these with some real life examples. And sometimes it's, you know, jumps out at you and sometimes it doesn't. I totally agree with you on that.
Mhm.
You know, but again, we might not get them all perfectly the way we might want in our very first kick at it, but as we move forward, we'll get some more and more examples every year of situations that support our students to understand where this applies in real life.
Right.
And I think this is going to help too. And the government's also saying they're going to be coming out with some sample questions that I think in this particular area might help make things a little bit more clear.
Yeah.
This is a living document. Sorry, team. This
Yeah.
is a living document that they're going to keep adding to, which is why it's not one of these like previous ones where you can print it off and have a copy in your duotang in your day book. I would suggest that we keep referring back to this document and seeing what's in there new for us to use to support our students.
Because then sometimes you might get a real world example, like an example of a real world application of a constant rate is an hourly wage of $15 per hour.
Yeah. I think it's important to notice here too, Tina, if you go back up in the actual expectation, they have some words that are underlined. So if there are some words that you're not quite sure what they actually mean, what the vocabulary is, or just want to double check, if you click on those, a little pop-up at the bottom shows you a definition of that word and gives you some examples.
Right.
It's kind of handy with some of those grade 7, 8 vocabulary that we come across. From here, we thought we'd take you back to the slide deck and show you some of the resources that we think might help with this particular topic. So SuperSource and EduGains are popular resources I think most teachers have had. I think it's important to notice here that EduGains is going to be leaving us as of December 31st, I think, isn't it, T?
Yeah, end of the December 31st, I believe, yes.
Yeah. So if that's a go-to resource for you, you might want to go in there and download some stuff so that you have copies of that. We also have the From Patterning to Algebra book in the bottom right there that all schools should have. And Tina and I both agree, as intermediate teachers, this book, we found it quite helpful. And the lessons are very well laid out, and it goes in the progression that you could pretty much use this resource to help get you through this whole unit.
So I think that's important to note that the resources that we had are still, we can still use. It's looking at them with the new lens and making sure that they still kind of align to what we're trying to do with our new curriculum expectations. So for example, if we're looking at patterns to algebra, we're looking at growing linear patterns, and it's a tool for supporting the understanding of that concept. I'm going to post an example of, so it's in most schools. You might have to go a little bit of digging around for it. It should be in every school. I'm going to post an example, a sample of the resource that you can take a look at to kind of get an idea of what that resource looks like.
Right. So it's just a sample actually in the Stasha app that's online.
Right.
The actual entire resource, no, it's one they have to pay for. And the school boards, every school should have a copy of it. Now, this was about 5 or 6 years ago, I think, that they were given out. Where they are now, that is kind of the probably $1 million question in some books, in some schools, sorry.
I feel like some teachers lay claim to these books. So, you know, being in the virtual, for me to try to find one, it would be challenging.
Right. And reach out to us. We can be a resource there too, right? So often we can, you know, I'm happy to lend a copy, or, you know, often if we have a conversation with administrators, they're happy to support you getting the resources that you need as well. So this is kind of just a sample of what it looks like. And there's some really great resources here to help support kind of our teacher understanding, as well as just the approach through which these lessons are sequenced. So the idea is that all of the lessons begin with the concrete. So students are manipulating tiles to match pattern rules. And when kids have that ability, we can quickly, they kind of have an in, right? It lowers the floor to entry. Every kid can get in and try to build a pattern in some way. And then we also, as teachers, can really, we can see their thinking immediately.
Sure.
There's lots of really great research behind this book. Dr. Ruth Beatty, of course, is a colleague of mine because she works for Lakehead University on the Aurelia campus, and the research behind it is really solid. And I've worked with this book myself with adult learners, and I learned a ton myself about linear growing patterns that I did not learn as a student coming through.
Exactly. I like the way that it's laid out too, because it has lots of guiding questions, and it just helps you really dig deeply into what the kids might be thinking.
Yeah, thanks for that reminder, Denise. It does have really great questions, like that section of the curriculum that you were looking at before with the mathematical conversation. Sometimes I know teachers ask me all the time, but I don't know what questions to ask. And this book will get you started there for sure.
So here's an example of the rocket ship pattern. And here are some key questions that we're going to be asking students to demonstrate their understanding.
Each lesson really scaffolds off of the one prior one. And like I sometimes, depending on my classroom, I picked and choosed some of the lessons from it. I haven't gone like lesson 1, lesson 2. Right. Sometimes I move around to that. But another really kind of key point as we're talking about expectations, as you get further along in this, you actually get into graphing the linear pattern and understanding. You know, if I see the pattern rule, I can graph it and I can understand, you know, what the graph means. So I think that's D 1.3 for data visualization. So it kind of moves in not only from the patterning, but also into graphing.
Yeah, that's a great point, Brandon. And T and I were talking about that earlier, how that you can really see this book blends in. Even there's some number sense that you get out of here, because you can talk about how when the multiplier, as it gets bigger, the line, the steep on the slope on the graph gets bigger.
Right.
I really enjoyed this book, and this is kind of a go-to teaching. So I can bring it when I come to the virtual world next week there, Kristen and Nastasha. Yeah.
That'd be wonderful. Thank you.
Perfect.
Okay, from here, team, we're going to go into some some assessment and evaluation. And we're going to talk about the growing success document. So this rubric that's at the beginning of the math curriculum has not changed. It is the same. It still has the same language that's in it. So that shouldn't be a cause for concern.
Yeah. So, and just, yeah, and really like, kind of focusing in on that, like our evaluation really should be balanced and triangulated between having those observations, conversations, and student products. So having those three things and having them all communicate the same information helps us to have more valid data when we're reporting on student learning. And like when I think about these things, observations and conversations, we're kind of in a place now where, especially the virtual teachers, they have great tools for collecting those conversations and being able to record those conversations in a way that wasn't really possible before or as easily accessible.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those lemonade moments where you're making lemonade out of the lemons.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
So this stayed the same, I guess,
Yes.
is the big message. Yeah.
And if you go to the next slide, Tina, at the very top, it actually is an addendum that is in the growing success document that talks about the 1 mark change that's happening to the report card that's coming in January. And it's not much at this point, but this is what the government has put out there, saying that you are to give the mark, the grade, the percentage that best reflects the overall learning of your student in mathematics. So again, I think that's where Teen says when you add in the observations, the conversations, and the product, you have to get kind of an overall picture of where that student's at in mathematics with their learning up until this point.
Right. I think it's important to note that also, like, it does note when appropriate, teachers may make reference to particular strands in their comments. So you can still speak to some of the key learning or kind of best exemplars from different strands.
Absolutely. And then we'll just talk briefly about Memo 10 that came out from our board last week. I believe it says December 3rd there,
December
team.
3rd, yes.
Yeah. So it's talking about the social emotional learning expectations that are in the new math curriculum and how there are some issues related to the subjectivity of those expectations. And basically our board has said that at this time, they would love for us to still keep teaching to those expectations. But for right now, we've been given the stop sign that we don't have to actually report or evaluate on those expectations at this time. So again, that's Memo 10. It's on the board website if you want some more information on that. But we're pausing on the evaluating of it, but we're going to keep going with teaching our students a lot of those key skills.
Thank you.
Yeah. And from here, Heather, this is where we're going to just ask you to give us a little bit of information too. We thought for the January session coming up, we talked about where we'd like to go for that particular session. And we're going to be looking at the C2 expectation, which digs more deeply into some language maybe that people aren't familiar with.
Yeah, so when we come back in January, Teen and Denise and I were, when we met last week, we looked at the C2.1 and we thought maybe we'll dig into this one. I'm just looking at the grade 7 one. It says add and subtract monomials with a degree of 1 that involve whole numbers using tools. And I don't know about you, but when I read that, even as a math person, I was second guessing myself in terms of if I really understood what that meant and what that would look like. And so we thought some support in that area would be helpful for ourselves as well as maybe a few other people.
Right, absolutely. And Tina and I felt a little bit better when we heard Heather say that. That kind of had a little cause of confusion for her too.
Yeah, and they're not necessarily new ideas, that they are kind of embedded in some of the work that we've done before, but maybe with like new name nomenclature and terms. So we're going to dig into that in our next session, which is going to be on Thursday, January 21st. So everyone's going to have a wonderful holiday and be well rested and come back recharged. And we're hoping to see everybody again on at the same time on January 21st, 2021.
Don't forget about the Jamboard document. You can add some sticky notes on there for some things if you want us to look more deeply into them. And at this time, we'd like to just thank our guest panelists for being here today, Kristen, Nastasha, and Brandon. Thank you very much. Heather Wark, always a pleasure to have you on board with us here. Teen, it's really an honor to work with you and your intermediate knowledge. You and I kind of bang ideas off one another. Very helpful. And Rod's behind the scenes, making sure everybody's microphone is working.
Doing all the magic.
Yes.
Just as a reminder, thank you to everyone who has attended. I know that like everyone's life is busy. People are often running off to pick up kids and all that stuff. So this is not always an ideal time. Everything that we are doing here will be available on demand 24/7 on the blogspot at lklmpro.blogspot.com. So those of you that were able to join us today, if you would help us spread the word, we would appreciate that.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, bye.